Alright, sup everybody, welcome back to the Path of Rage and our Tuesday Star Citizen coverage. Grab a drink, grab something to eat. This is going to be a long one. We've got a lot to go over. We've got the tech preview that's happened twice so far this week. As a matter of fact, I literally just jumped out of the test prior to recording this video where we got to test the server crash recovery that CIG has been working on. We have Inside Star Citizen showing off the FPS changes that are coming up. We have a monthly report to go over, and we also have Star Citizen Live on Friday, from Friday, that was going even more into answering the questions that players had about the upcoming master modes in 3.23. Like I said, we got a lot to go over, so strap in and let's get into it. First things first, let's talk about the tech preview and the server replication layer and the crash recovery test that we just finished. We had over 100 players on the Stanton part of the server test, and I can't remember exactly how many were on Pyro system. We had people attempting to jump through both ways and just moving around the verse as normal. It wasn't so much a stress test as wanting to see if it crashed. I think they were manipulating crashes because we ended up having about 6 of them, and most of them were recovered. They took a long time in some cases, and for different Evocati members, the time it took for you to get back into the server and have it running again after a crash recovery was different for each player. I had the first few times I had about 5 to 10 minute waits in order for the server to recover and for me to start being able to play the game again, whereas other people got in much quicker. The final time that the server crashed and recovered, it only took about 2 or 3 minutes, so it did improve quite a bit. I was never kicked out, and I always picked up exactly where I left off, so overall the test was successful. Obviously CIG wants to make that recovery time much quicker, but you know, this is tier 0. We're testing all this out right now. This is very cutting edge tech on their part, and it is what it is. The fact that it worked at all was actually quite encouraging. One thing that did get noticed by the Evocati, among many other things of course, but if you did recover from the server crash, your inventory would no longer be available. You would have to actually go back to the main menu and re-log in to access your inventory. But from my experience, even though I couldn't access my inventory, I could still use a kiosk and buy stuff. I couldn't get it afterward, but the kiosks worked for both the hospital and the shopping center store on Horizon. Even the merchandise where you could buy like Picos, that stuff worked, but you couldn't access your inventory unless you relogged. That was the only real game-breaking thing that happened, other than, you know, the server freezing up when it did crash. You would get a notice pop up in the middle of the screen that said server error, please wait, and then you would sit there and that's what you would do, is wait. Eventually you would get back in and it would pick back up. Again, it seemed to work as expected. Obviously, again, they want to cut down on the time that it takes for the servers to recover, but at the beginning, I was able to get to the jump points both a couple of times, and I was able to jump through with both a Cutlass Black and a Constellation. Some people were saying that certain ships wouldn't go in, like the I believe it was the Sentinel. A couple other ships that don't have the proper quantum drive, so they can't go through the jump gates at this moment. Apparently it does work if you switch out the quantum drive in those ships with another one, but not always. When I did go through with the Cutlass, I went through in the proper direction. Went forward, going straight through. With the Constellation, As soon as I got into the wormhole, it flipped the entire ship backwards. Shot me through the entire wormhole with very placeholder art. It looks like a giant brown worm in space. Literally like an earthworm. It shot me out backwards in the Connie. At which point I collided with another ship and exploded. With the Cutlass, I came out the right way. Came out very, very quickly. Was able to avoid any obstacles, didn't die, and ended up in Pyro without a problem. Faster than I thought it would be, to be honest. I thought the trip through the wormhole would actually take a little bit longer. It wasn't that long, maybe 10 seconds, tops. Pyro wasn't fully opened or whatnot. This is all based on a 322 build, not 323. So there was some stuff to do, but it was the same as the tech preview that everyone got to check out a while back. The one weird thing about it is that when you come out of the jump point, you don't come out of the jump point at the end of the jump point where it says it is in that system. And what do I mean by that? If you go to the Stanton to Pyro jump point in the Stanton system, it's on the southern edge, the southern regions, pardon me, of the system. It's down near ArcCorp and whatnot. That's where you come out in Pyro, the same area, down in the southern area of the system. But in Pyro, the jump gate to Stanton is in the northeast quadrant of the system. It takes a long time to get there to go back. So I think there's a desync in where the exit of the wormhole comes out. Probably explains why the journey through the wormhole in the jump point, pardon me, seems so short to me. It seems to be that you are coming out in the wrong section. I could be wrong. I don't know. CIG hasn't said, to my knowledge. I keep an eye on the forums as much as I can, but you can always miss something. But that is one thing that was noticeable. You would think that you would come out at the jump point exit as it's marked. But other than that, the test went overall fairly well. For me, I spent a lot of time waiting for the server to recover. But, again, it did recover each and every time. And the only reason why I had to leave the game and come back at all was to get the inventory working. And we know that that'll be something they patch as they go along. Overall, very successful test, I think. We had the servers up and straining and crashing repeatedly, come back up, work for a few minutes, crash again, until finally it did start working. Test. So overall, it was a good experience, and I hope CIG got a lot of data out of it, and I'll probably be testing it out again tomorrow, I believe. But in the meantime, let's move on. Moving on to the Squadron 42 monthly report for February. First off, starting with the AI content team. They have continued to make key enhancements and refinements, with the Idris Stanton receiving focus in February. Dynamic conversations were fine-tuned with updates to NPC standing positions, and randomizations were added to provide a more authentic feel. Updates were also made to the gym, including punching bags that now align perfectly and animate properly. They reworked gym hours to be more balanced so that there will be a decent number of NPCs whenever they choose to visit. Plans for busier times were created to find NPCs always being able to have a place to work. Animations were added to the bridge, including hands-on ears, to demonstrate cross-ship communications and a little bit more variety. And throughout the ships, NPCs will now have a more diverse range of items on them too. Trolley pushing and cargo handling were refined with their animations for more realism, and the security officer outside the bridge salutes the players as they walk by. With the AI features team, they progressed 2 key fights and improved combat animations for first-person encounters. Hit reactions were also enabled for the NPCs, with expanded movement systems allowing NPCs to use ad hoc animations to enter cover without passing through dynamically created paths. They also continued to support the other squadron teams by investigating and fixing various bugs. For the AI tech team, they focused on various improvements, from NPCs using trolleys, the exact positioning of trolleys in the environment was focused on. NPCs can now correctly push trolleys to an arbitrary location, and they improved transit and elevator usage while pushing trolleys so that the overall flow looks proper. Spaceship behaviors were iterated on to deliver better combat ship versus ship turret action, and fighters will now correctly target standalone turrets and perform appropriate combat behaviors. Numerous updates were added to the Apollo tool, which is one of their development tools. I think that's what they used to call subsumption. These updates were improved feedback errors for missions and such. The team also increased the usability of navigating between mission callbacks, allowing designers to use appropriate logic for multiple elements in the interface. And a new UI for subsumption is underway as well. Also, specifically for Squadron 42, the AI tech team focused on support and bug fixes across the entire project. They fixed a calculation in the animations that NPCs use to enter cover to make sure they're facing the right way for it. They also fixed an issue with operator ship seats, causing the AI to think that only a specific available animation was available when exiting. In the art direction for art and weapons, we saw the weapons team improving wear maps across all of the FPS weapons and redesigning iron sights alongside the screen sizes for dedicated tools and multi-tools, and various improvements were made to both the fire extinguisher and a slight rework apparently on the Bearing 54 AR rifle. For the gameplay story team, they began updating a number of scenes in Chapter 16 with the new standard helmet, saying that, quote, "It felt great to get these scenes finished off and to see the helmet animating nicely as the characters put it on." They also began receiving new facial animations and mastered audio, allowing them to complete several more existing scenes. The new motion capture enabled significant updates to a further range of other scenes. And for example, a two-person scene in Chapter 4 was reshot to account for a new location and start poses, which significantly improved the overall scene. Polish was done for Chapter 1, and a small but significant update was made to the cast in Chapter 14. The graphics and VFX programming teams progressed on their longer-term tasks. For example, working and getting closer to completion on the unification of gas cloud and planet cloud upscaling. The challenges caused by animated lights in the clouds need to be solved. The gas cloud occlusion effect is also nearing completion, which will increase the detail levels of all gas clouds, even in flat-lit scenarios. And this is going to be a nice improvement just because of the way the clouds tend to look, especially on Orzen. There's a lot of artifacting. I look forward to seeing what they're doing here to fix that. They also resolved a long-standing issue that caused a harsh line to appear when 600 meters from where a gas cloud blends with the near fog system. Global illumination teams continued to work on a system to approximate complex materials within a ray trace world, and last month began looking into important performance improvements before taking on some of the more complex issues like moving objects and zones. The devs from the Water Strike team closed out the issues that came up in a final review, along with some new features, including SDF interaction for accurate collisions when vehicles hit the water and an improved water intersection shader. But the rest of the graphics team focused on improving the upscaling tech. This involves finalizing a new mesh format that gives major performance improvements, and any of us following this project are very much looking forward to that. In the level design area, the social narrative team continued to focus on their chapters, the majority of which are Idris interstitials, because a lot of this game will be taking place in and around that Idris. In February, the work involved making sure the chapter can play from start to finish, and that all narratives and scenes are present and correct. They ensured that medical flow is working, objectives and markers are in place, emails are where they need to be, chat room content is present, text briefs for missions are updated, and the like. Outside of that, feedback was addressed and polishing was done for Chapter 1 and the Poros and Shubin Archon locations. On the narrative front, the team continued closing out the remaining text needs, providing chatter for some of the background environments, mobiGlass content, writing content for cinematics, and creating other opportunities for storytelling to enrich the locations and provide a sense of history. The team continued to work with gameplay and design to polish the Galactopedia and solidifying approaches for how and when articles in the Galactopedia unlock. Existing entries were also passed along to the localization for translation. Narrative finally continued to review the last levels via playthrough and video to see if scenes are triggering as intended, alongside polishing the overall narrative experience. The R&D teams continued to work on the temporal rendering mode, which switched the history filtering to a bicubic filter to avoid diffusion and resampling blur due to repeated history lookups. I have no idea what that means. Maybe some of you do. If you do, sound off in the comments. Care was taken to eliminate potential ringing artifacts during strong camera movements. The filtering was improved to avoid glowing silhouettes around objects in foregrounds with clouds and sun behind them. Various improvements were made to preserve history details as long as possible, such as slow movement, no significant cloud occlusion or disocclusion, and quickly converging a full resolution image in case the history needs to be rejected. Again, don't know what any of that means. That's for the more graphically and tech-minded watchers among you. If that helps you out, I'm glad. Moving on. The tech animation team refocused on refining head assets and cleaning up tech debt around their implementation, which is a precursor to polishing the assets, refining eye alignment, and making sure characters look as good as possible. Further to this, large contingent of the team is working on asset setup for lockers, which will allow players and NPCs to change their apparel to something more appropriate to their current priorities. This is kind of goes in line with what they've talked about before, I think, where eventually they want it so when you enter a station, or at the very least a landing zone, you are going to go up to a public locker and remove your armor and your weapons. You won't be walking around Area 18 fully armed to the teeth with your armor on. I believe they've said that they want to get rid of this. That sounds like this is the start of that, or working towards it. Continuing on, the team also kicked off initiatives to ensure the health of the build remains stable and tech debt buildup over the course is triaged. Regarding the UI team, they worked closely with environments and cinematics, creating several pieces of movie-style user interface that appear during cutscenes. They also created scenes around game levels to help with storytelling and atmosphere, with design work being done to help improve EVA and AR markers as well. And finally, the VFX team went to work as usual on art, cinematics, and design support, focusing on polishing and optimizing an effects-intensive in-game scenario. Part of this, the artists were looking at areas where they can create bespoke explosion texture sequences to create a more cinematic and high-fidelity experience. And as anyone who's ever followed this project knows, high fidelity is absolutely the word of the day when it comes to Star Citizen. In last week's Inside Star Citizen, they were discussing all the new additions that are coming to the first-person combat perspective of the game. Reloading, scopes, repooling your ammo, stuff like that. So let's get into it. When asked about reloading and why it's even in the game instead of having, infinite ammo, laser weapons and whatnot, because we're supposed to be 900 years in the future, CIG said it's in the game because it's part of the classic FPS experience. It makes you give some thought to what you're doing in combat, makes it more immersive. Magazines will be stored on the armor as they are now, or in the backpack, and if the player has no ammo on their suit, but they have it in the backpack, they can still reload while in combat, but at the cost of a much longer reload time. An animation will be played while this reload is happening to show that you are dipping into your pack. This will allow players to avoid having to go into their inventory and manually dragging clips to the suit in the middle of combat in order to reload. The UI will show how many mags are on your suit, along with how many bullets they have, as well as an icon showing a backpack if you have mags stored in the backpack as well. Looking at the icon, You will see that if the next icon is the backpack one, it means that your next reload will be from the pack and take a longer time to complete. Ammo repooling will also be a single key hit that will cause all partial magazines to be combined into full or mostly full magazines. The time required to do this will depend on the type and or size of the magazines being repooled. Pistol mags will take much less time to repool than, say, rocket mags, for example. This means less time is spent in the inventory menu, keeping players in the game itself. These changes are coming in 3.2.3, and with team looking into throwables such as grenades, as well as the multi-tool, med pens, and a few other things that have to be hammered out in the future. Recoil will also be different based on the weapon itself, with big differences being seen between heavy-hitting assault rifles and small, quiet pistols, for example. The devs spoke a fair bit about recoil and laser weapons as well, addressing exactly why lasers even have recoil at all. They say this is more to gameplay and immersion than anything else, stating that the lack of recoil makes guns feel boring. Recoil now encompasses both vertical and horizontal motion, as currently the recoil is mostly horizontal and not quite how they want it. They are calling this procedural recoil and feel it makes the guns feel both unique from each other and more realistic overall. We will be getting not only new scopes in 3.2.3, but new iron sights for the guns as well, which will be slightly higher on the gun, giving players a better view of their targets and field of vision around them, which will be especially nice coming with, some of the chunkier body guns in the Star Citizen universe. Scopes are being mostly overhauled as well, but the black border that was around the 8x scopes and up now gone, keeping the player view around the scopes and adding in parallax and other effects to make it look that much better. 3.2.3 will also see the addition of a variable scope, or variable scopes, with CIG specifically mentioning 2 and 4x scopes and 8 to 16x scope. The dynamic crosshair will be coming in 3.2.3, which means if you have a combat visor on, you will have the dynamic crosshair. This follows the actual direction of the barrel, showing where the gun is actually pointing at all times. This will help for the hipfire to a degree, also tends to encourage ADSing even in closer situations. This will also be very useful, as you will be able to see if you can actually shoot past the cover you are behind, or if your shot is going to hit it directly in front of you instead. You can disable it if you don't like it, as well as the hit markers. You can choose to have them both on or off, or a mix of the two, with crosshair off and markers on, for example. Things like grenades and backpacks will no longer block bullets from hitting enemies, which is a nice quality of life improvement, and the devs said that overall it feels far more fun and fluid for players. Moving on to Star Citizen Live, they spent the hour answering questions in deeper coverage of master modes. When asked about the difference between combat and non-combat ships, they said that there will be no difference between them. You will use nav mode to travel and SCM mode for normal gameplay. Combat ships will use SCM mode for combat, but trade ships like the Vulture, for example, will also use SCM mode in order to use their salvage mode. The devs pointed out that non-combat ships should still be able to escape combat fairly easily, especially once their nav mode is spooled up. Master modes is a baseline for the ships, and CIG will tune them based on their needs in order to keep things overall fair, with the devs pointing out that while some players are all about combat, others who are playing the game have no interest in it at all. Roles and the balance of the ships need to reflect that as well. Regarding interdiction, that is still in discussion how it is going to work overall with Master. And while it is currently in development for 3.2.3, there are some questions that still need to be answered before it finally makes the cut. CIG was very on point as well by emphasizing the archetypes for the ships are not roles. They are entirely different things. Archetypes are a baseline for flight profiles for the ships that will then be altered as needed based on the actual role the ship is supposed to fill. Players can stay in nav mode as long as they want, but since most systems won't be working in nav mode, such as shields, mining lasers, salvage arms, etc., Players will need to go to SCM mode to actually use their ships as intended. Flight and atmosphere will not be affected by master modes in the same way, as players' ships will still be affected by drag and other atmospheric properties in both nav and SCM modes. The transition time between SCM and nav mode will also be different per ship, which will likely be affected by the type of quantum drive the ship has. In 323, all ships will also have different transition times, with larger ships typically taking longer to switch into nav mode. The HUD will also be seeing a partial update in 323, encompassing the visor updates that we've seen in previous videos, but not the ship MFDs yet, which will be coming later. This is simply due to the resource allocation required for development. The visor updates will be what is coming first. The devs did get a bit more into one-on-one fights currently, with ideas being tried to improve this arena of combat with possible different motion vectors, side to side and front to back, and different speeds. Yogi mentioned that the 6-degree freedom of movement is a big problem that they're trying to account for, and as always, this will be an ongoing process, and we players are going to be the ones to give them the feedback they need to make it as good as they can for everyone. The devs feel that master modes will lower the skill floor a bit for players to get into PvP and combat, allowing more accessible players an easier way in, while providing a higher skill ceiling as well for players who focus on ship combat. When asked about racing and SCM speeds and how racing ships feel less agile now, Yogi said that this is very likely because they removed the added acceleration players got from tricording, which was an unintentional aspect of the current flight model. They even said that the racetracks themselves will probably need to be updated to fit the new speeds and maneuverability of the various ships. When asked about the current power triangle, the devs said that the triangle still works as always, it's just that nav mode prevents you from using the weapons and shields while in it. They are still powered on, however, and will be recharging in the background, set by the triangle if players wish, ready to come back into place once the player drops into SCM mode. The shield fills a buffer that fills the shields when you come out of nav mode, same with the weapons, and this can't be interrupted by being shot. Currently, countermeasures are unavailable in nav mode, but as always, things are subject to change. When asked about nav mode and escaping combat and bounty hunting, the devs said that they are thinking about the importance of distortion weapons and how they might affect quantum drives, forcing players to make choices in weapon loadouts and specializing equipment if they are going for bounty hunting. This is an ongoing discussion for various teams across CIG, as bounty hunting is considered to be a core pillar of the game. They will certainly be taking all of these questions into account going forward. And there you have it, folks. That is our Star Citizen update for this week. There's a lot to go over. There was a lot to unpack. It was a great test, a couple of tests actually, for the replication layer and the server recovery. I'm looking forward to the next one. I am excited for this year in Star Citizen. I think big things are coming, and I can't wait to see it. Give me a like if you thought I did a good job on this video. Give me a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe if you're new to help me grow the channel. And until next time, I've been Rage at Games, and I will see you in the verse.